International News Edition. The Prime Minister says Jordan spends about half of its budget on oil imports for nuclear generation, which prompts it to look for nuclear, wind and solar energy. Egypt steps up a crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood after declaring it a terrorist organization. And Israel plans to push for more settlement construction to coincide with its release of more Palestinian prisoners next week. Good evening and welcome to the news. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said no decision has yet been taken on the launch of a nuclear power station in the kingdom. He said deliberations have been ongoing with various social segments to arrive at the right decision in 2 years. Speaking to women leaders during a meeting at the Ministry of Political Development, the Prime Minister said he was keen to hold dialogue with the country's women as a key partner in the decision-making process. During the meeting attended by Jordan Atomic Energy Commission Chairman Khal, Mansour said the energy issue is extremely sensitive as the kingdom spends 4 billion dinars on foreign oil imports, or about half of its 10 billion dinar budget. He said that surveys pointed that Jordan had no oil reserves, but alternative steps would be taken, including licensing a company to generate electricity from wind energy in Tafile at a cost of $250 million dinars. Furthermore, the government had this year awarded tenders to 10 solar energy companies, and 10 others are on the way. Mansour spoke about a 7% annual rise in oil consumption, which he said underlined the importance of nuclear energy. Touqan said Jordan had 2 years to take this strategic decision on the nuclear power plant, adding that scientific data and facts had been published to arrive at convictions by all social segments and take the proper decision. The Senate approved a set of legislations as passed by the lower house, including an amendment to the Conscription and Military Reserve Service law. The upper house also passed the amended law on the trial of ministers during a session chaired by its president, الروابط, and attended by Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour and cabinet ministers. The key change stipulates that ministers should be put on trial for crime during service before a specialized regular courts in the capital after the abolishment of the Higher Council for the Interpretation of the Constitution. The senators also concurred with MPs on the amendment to the Construction Contractors Law of 2013, which aims to empower the Contractors Association in its efforts to achieve social solidarity among members. During the deliberations, Minister of Energy Mohammed Hamid said Jordan's nuclear program is a strategic choice that would provide an economically efficient, stable and environment-friendly energy source, pointing to the kingdom's dire energy situation and the high cost of electricity generation. Over to Egypt, where police arrested 16 Muslim Brotherhood supporters, the first arrest on charges of belonging to a terrorist organization. The arrest came a day after the military-backed government declared the Brotherhood a terrorist group. The men were arrested in the Nile Delta province of Sharqiya on suspicion of crimes, including promoting the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, distributing its leaflets and inciting violence against the army and police. Earlier, a bomb blast hit a Cairo bus, injuring at least 4 people. Egypt's Interior Ministry said the homemade device was planned on a traffic island. A second device found nearby was dismantled. The blast hit a bus in Cairo's Nasser City district 2 days after a car bomb killed at least 16 in the Nile Delta town of Mansoura. A Cairo resident said he saw several people injured, including one covered in blood, when he arrived at the scene of the bombing minutes after it happened. An Israeli official said the government plans to announce a push for more construction in Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank when it frees 26 Palestinian prisoners next week. The move could jeopardize the already struggling U.S.-brokered peace talks. We get more in this report.
Israel continues to place obstacles that would threaten peace talks with the Palestinians. An Israeli official said Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government will announce a new push for more construction in Jewish settlements on the occupied West Bank and Arab East Jerusalem next week. The planned announcement will coincide with an Israeli plan to free 24 Palestinian prisoners. Palestinians have said any further settlement expansion could undermine the negotiations, which resumed in July after intensive shuttle diplomacy by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has continued to pledge more settlement building, often timing the announcement of these plans to offset the anger of far-right political partners at Israel's release of Palestinians jailed for deadly attacks. Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon hinted at a new settlement plans during a visit to a military base.
I
think it is our right to build, certainly according to our understandings and agreements with the Americans. And in accordance with that, we shall continue to build.
A spokesman for the anti-settlement group Peace Now said Netanyahu was putting the success of negotiations at risk.
What is clear to the international community and to many Israelis and to the Palestinians is not clear to Netanyahu. Building and promoting of settlements is devastating for the two-state solution and counterproductive.
A spokesman for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah party said the Israeli announcement was contrary to the international law and had not been coordinated with US officials. The negotiations have made no clear signs of progress on core conflict issues, but Kerry has expressed hopes of achieving a deal by April. Palestinian negotiator Saber Raqat said he thought it would take a year to draft any agreement. The peace talks have also been strained by a rise in violence in the past weeks. Israel closed a commercial crossing into the blockaded Gaza Strip as its tanks patrolled the border fence after a Gaza sniper shot dead an Israeli man over the border. Israel hit back with airstrikes on 2 Hamas training camps, which killed a Palestinian girl. Luay Balqar for the news at 10.
In Syria, government forces and rebel fighters in the besieged Damascus suburb of Mu'addamiyah have agreed to a 48-hour truce. The ceasefire could result in food being allowed into the suburb for residents threatened with starvation. Children have died from malnutrition in the town, and thousands of people face starvation. Some have resorted to eating leaves to survive. The fragile ceasefire in Mu'addamiyah began yesterday with the raising of a government flag on the town's tallest building. If the truce holds until Friday, the army has said it will allow food in. Meanwhile, China said it will provide an escort for the maritime transportation of serious chemical weapons. The announcement comes in response to calls from both the UN Security Council and the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW. The most dangerous chemical substances in Syria will be transported out of the country by the end of the year, with the remainder due to be shipped out for destruction no later than June next year. According to the OPCW's plan, Denmark and Norway will provide vessels for the transportation of the chemicals, while countries including Finland, Russia and the United States have also pledged their help. 10 new ministers entered the Turkish government, a day after Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan reshuffled his cabinet. The government shake-up came amid a corruption scandal that has pitted the ruling AK party government against the judiciary. The new ministers took over during handover ceremonies in their respective ministries. Among 10 new loyalist Minister Erdogan named was Efkan Ala, a former governor of Diyarbakir province, who will wield the powerful interior portfolio and oversee Turkish domestic security. Ala replaces Muammar Guler, one of 3 cabinet members who resigned after their sons were detained in a corruption probe that erupted on December 17th. Guler sacked or resigned dozens of police officers involved, including the chief of the force in Istanbul. Guler, outgoing economy minister Zafer Gaglayan, and outgoing environment minister Erdogan Bari Qatar all denied any wrongdoing by their sons or the government. African mediators trying to broker a deal in South Sudan said they held constructive talks with President Salva Kiir. Violence erupted in the South Sudanese capital Juba on December 15th and has quickly spread, dividing the landlocked country along ethnic lines. Western powers and East African states have tried to mediate between Kiir, a Dinka, and rebel leader Riek Machar, a Nuer, who was vice president until Kiir sacked him back in July. Despite African Union calls for a Christmas Day ceasefire, rebels and government troops clashed in Malakal, capital of the major oil state of Upper Nile. Kiir and Machar have both said their dispute is political, not tribal. They said they are ready for dialogue, but the rebellion leader Riek Machar says for talks to take place, all those detained from his group must be released, a condition that President Salva Kiir is not ready to give in.
We discussed, where among others, one is on the cessation of hostilities, and the second issue is on the immediate start of talks or dialogue to settle the issue politically. And the third issue is on the detainees who are suspects of the coup. And the fourth is the humanitarian crisis.
We begin with the West Asian Football Federation Championship. Jordan drew 0-0 with Lebanon in a Group C opener of the championship now held in the Qatari capital Doha. In the second round, the Al Nashama will face Kuwait on January the 1st. Over to tennis, Joe Wilfried Tsonga beat Andy Murray on the opening day of the World Tennis Championship in Abu Dhabi. Murray started well with a mixture of fine shots and good running and reactions, but Tsonga took the first set with a neat lob. After breaking each other at the start of the second set, Murray fell back, making too many mistakes, while Tsonga served up several aces and won the match 7-5, 6-3. Tsonga will face world number 2 Novak Djokovic in the second semi-final on Friday. And also in Abu Dhabi, David Ferrer cruised past Swiss world number 8 Stanislas Wawrinka by 2 straight sets, 7-5, 6-1. His win came days after splitting with his coach of the past 15 years, Javier Piles. He's now working with Jose Altur. Ferrer will meet fellow Spaniard and world number 1 Rafael Nadal on Saturday. A flotilla of 94 yachts led by race favourite and 6-time winner Wild Oats, the 11th, sailed out of Sydney Harbour in the 69th running of the Sydney to Hobart Ocean Classic. With several changes in the weather forecast in the lead-up to the race, skippers predicted an especially challenging and unpredictable run to the Tasmanian capital. The international competition has been boosted by 12 boats from the Clipper Round. The World Race, which is for the first time, is including the iconic Ocean Classic, often referred to as the Hobart, as part of its 40,000 nautical mile 11-month race. The Sydney to Hobart is a sporting staple of the festive season in Australia, with the race start being held during the launch break of the first day of the 4th Ashes Test match at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Finally, a look at the weather forecast. Cold tonight in most regions with a chance for local showers in the country's east. Freeze is expected in the late night and early morning hours in the Badia Desert region, the hilly areas as well. Winds tonight will be southeasterly brisk. A slight rise in temperatures is in the forecast tomorrow, but it will remain relatively cold in the hilly areas and fair in the Jordan Valley and Aqaba, where temperatures will hover around the low 20s. Winds tomorrow will be southeasterly moderate. The port city of Aqaba should expect northerly moderate winds and slightly rough seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To close, here is a reminder of the day's top stories. The Prime Minister says Jordan spends about half of its budget on oil imports for nuclear generation, which prompts it to look for nuclear, wind and solar energy. Egypt steps up a crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood after declaring it a terrorist organization. And Israel plans to push for more settlement construction to coincide with its release of more Palestinian prisoners next week. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is Raad Liptoush. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.